My father called me into the majlis today, his voice calm but his eyes filled with something deeper, an emotion I couldn't quite place. I walked toward him with the quiet respect I always hold in my heart for him, and as I sat beside him, he asked me something that made my soul pause. "Hamdan," he said, "when are you going to stop hiding your heart from the world?" I looked at him, startled, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, with no judgment, only love. It was as though he had been waiting to say it for a long time. In the silence that followed, my mind flooded with 1,000 images of her, of the woman whose name I have whispered into the wind but never spoken aloud in the family circles. I wanted to speak, but I hesitated. How do you explain a love that defies expectation? How do you confess to your father, a ruler, that your heart chose someone the world might not understand? He looked at me again, waiting, and then he said, "Your eyes tell your story before your lips ever do." I found my voice slowly, carefully. "Baba," I said, "there is someone, but she is not someone the world would expect me to love." I expected resistance, perhaps disapproval, but instead, he leaned back and smiled, as if my admission confirmed what he already knew. "Do you love her?" he asked. And I nodded. I told him she was not of royal blood, that she was older, wiser, and gentle in a way that broke my pride without breaking my spirit. I told him her silence was more powerful than 1,000 poems. He listened, and then he did something I didn't anticipate. He laughed, a deep, knowing laugh that shook the walls of the room and my understanding along with it. "Do you think I married your mother because of her lineage?" he said. "I married her because her presence brought me peace." Those words held a weight that struck me to the core. For the first time, I saw the man behind the throne, the father behind the king, the lover behind the legend. Then he leaned forward, and with a seriousness that only a father could possess, he said, "Don't let the world decide who you're allowed to love. If she brings you peace, if she challenges your spirit and respects your journey, then why should I or anyone else deny your truth?" It was the blessing I never asked for but always needed. And in that moment, I realized love is not about permission, it's about courage. He asked me to tell him everything. And so I did. I told him about the first time I met her, how her laughter melted the formalities around me, how her intellect danced with mine, how her calm made the chaos in my heart finally fall silent. I told him how I prayed about her, how I waited for signs, and how every single sign pointed back to her. My father didn't interrupt once. He let me pour out years of guarded silence in one unbroken wave. He reached out and placed his hand on mine, a gesture so rare from him that it brought a lump to my throat. "You are my son," he said. "Not just by blood, but by spirit. And if your spirit has chosen her, then I will meet her with an open heart." I almost couldn't believe it. In that moment, every fear, every hesitation, every voice that told me I couldn't bring her into my royal world faded into nothing. My father, the man the world calls ruler, called me something far more powerful today. He called me brave. Not because I conquered lands or led armies, but because I dared to speak the name of my love into his ears. He told me that ruling begins with honesty, and leadership begins at home. He said a man who cannot honor his heart cannot expect the world to follow his command. Later that evening, I walked the palace gardens alone, and for the first time in years, I felt light. I whispered her name into the air again, but this time without fear. I whispered it as a man who was no longer hiding. I whispered it as a prince who had been seen by his king and accepted. And I swear the moonlight seemed to shimmer brighter as if the sky itself was celebrating with me. My love, if you are reading this, know this truth. I am no longer waiting for the right time. I have spoken your existence into the very halls that once silenced my feelings. I have told the man who taught me how to be strong, that you are the reason I became gentle. And he did not resist. He welcomed your name into his heart like a prayer finally answered. You don't need to carry the burden of being worthy enough. My father saw the fire in my eyes, and he said it reminded him of himself when he found my mother. He said true love often comes in unexpected forms, but once it arrives, only a fool walks away from it. And I, my queen, will never be a fool. I will walk toward you every day, no longer in secret, no longer in shadows. I once feared that bringing you into my world would mean exposing you to judgment. But now, I see it differently. My world was never complete until you were part of it. And if my father, the heart of this nation, can see the beauty in our bond, then let the rest of the world follow or remain blind. Their vision is not my compass, my heart is. Tonight, I'll write your name in the stars with the same hands I used to lead this land. I'll carry your image not behind closed doors but before the sky, because you are not my secret, you are my soul. And the man who created me now knows who completes me. My dad asked me something crazy today, but it led me to the most beautiful truth I've ever spoken. When I returned to my chambers after that unforgettable conversation, I found myself overwhelmed, not with fear, but with a quiet kind of power. The kind that settles into your chest and makes you stand a little taller. I stood before the mirror, not as Sheikh Hamdan the poet, the prince, or the falconer. I stood as a man who had finally voiced the truth of his heart. And somehow, in doing so, I felt I had unlocked something sacred within me. For too long I had danced around expectations, balancing my feelings on a tightrope of tradition and image. But now, the mask had fallen, and in its place stood my most authentic self. I picked up my pen and opened my journal, the one that has held more of my truth than any throne ever could. I began to write your name again and again, letting the ink bleed the way my heart once bled in silence. Every letter of your name held a story, a moment, a reason. My fingers trembled slightly, not because I was uncertain, but because I was finally writing you in the light. No more metaphors. No more anonymous odes. Just you, in full clarity, exactly as you are. My muse. My compass. My truth. I remembered how I once told you, beneath the shade of the desert palms, that you were too sacred for this world. You laughed then, brushing my words off like they were sweet nothings. But they were not nothing. They were everything. And today, my father validated what I always knew, that you are not a shadow I should hide, but a light I must walk beside.